Plowshares, swords being made into them, spears into pruning hooks, wars no more. Can God really do this? Isaiah thought so. Recovery of sight to the blind, freedom to the oppressed, release to the captives, good news to the poor. Can God really do this? Jesus said so. A sweet sound to wretched souls, peace to fearful hearts, safety to those lost, dangers, toils, and snares minimized. Forgive a man who sold people into slavery. Can God do this? John Newton experienced such. He wrote Amazing Grace. And James Basker, an English historian at Barnard College, says that the hymn Amazing Grace appeals to all people, all faiths, all churches because, quote, the song is about that thing that human beings share, which is pain and the imaginative yearning. And this is the thing about human beings, he says, we are able to imagine and to yearn for joy and peace. Spencer LaJoye wrote the song Plowshare Prayer with that kind of yearning. And in her prayer, she asks for God to heal us all. Can God really do that? Spencer believed so. I had the opportunity to speak with Spencer about their faith, their song, and their hopes. They could not be here with us in person this morning, but we recorded that conversation for you this morning. Spencer blessed me with that conversation, and I hope they will bless you as well. I am thrilled to be able to introduce to you Spencer LaJoye. Spencer has a voice that is extraordinary. They have a way with words that just reaches into your heart, and combining those things together, they produce a song and music that really speaks to my soul, and I hope it'll speak to yours. Spencer, thank you so much for joining me and talking with me today.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine. I'm happy to be here.
So I framed what you do in my mind as a ministry. And so I'm curious about your faith journey. What brought you to this point?
So I grew up in rural Southwest Michigan, and my mother was Presbyterian, and my father was Catholic. And my baptism as an infant it involved the Presbyterian minister in our small town coming over to the Catholic Church and baptizing me along with the priest. So I am a baptized Presbatholic, truly. And so my entire upbringing was super ecumenical. The only difference that I knew between denominations was so minimal. I really only knew that there was one table and we all shared it. And that was faith for me from a young age. I think I saw a lot of different iterations of faith in myself, of Christian faith in myself. My young adult years were full of evangelicalism. I was a staunch evangelical for a while. I ended up at a Calvinist Christian college, which had its ups and downs. I really bought the total depravity, guilt, and shame were all created good, but we are, fallen and sinful people through and through. I really, really bought that and clung on to that until I started my own coming out process as bisexual and then later as non-binary. And I realized that I had to choose at that point between myself flourishing or this version of a shame-throwing God. I had to choose between one of those, and I am pleased to say that I chose myself, and I developed and met and grew in a relationship with a new image of God that was, I think, fuller and bigger and more powerful, and had room for all of me inside of it, which was lovely. I don't go to church anymore or work or practice that kind of faith anymore, but it's obviously a huge important part of my story that I cherish.
I love that you made that transition from a shame throwing God to a God that embraces you in the beautiful human being that you are. Not everybody makes that transition. And I'm just impressed by the breadth of religious education your faith journey has given you. Wow, from a cradle Methodist point of view, I know Methodism really well. All this other stuff I've had to kind of tiptoe around and understand in different ways. So even though you have that great diverse experience in the faith tradition, you went to Iliff. What prompted you to study theology?
I've been a lifelong musician. The songwriting brain and the theologian's brain, I think, are quite similar. The job of a songwriter and a theologian is to just pay attention to the world and try to make sense of it in hopefully the most beautiful way possible. So I picked up a religion degree in undergrad, and I loved it. I loved studying it. I found that the religion department at my historically conservative Christian college, my religion department had room for me as a queer person coming into themselves. They had room for different points of view. You know, they could entertain that, whereas other departments maybe couldn't. So I studied religion in undergrad, and then I also fell in love with a woman who was living in Denver, Colorado. So I ended up living in Colorado a couple years later, and I honestly needed something to do, and I didn't believe that I could make a living as a songwriter. For some reason, I didn't believe it, and so I said, "How can I make a living with my interests?" Well, I like theology. Let's go to seminary. There's this awesome seminary right down the road from where we live. So I started going to Iliff, and it became very clear to me my first quarter at Iliff that I was running away from my calling by being there. However, I told all my professors and my fellow classmates that I thought I was running away from my calling as a songwriter, and they said, "Okay, well, is it life-giving for you to be here and learning these things? Is it interesting to you? Do you like it?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And they're like, "Okay, you can stay." So I just stuck around and got the whole degree.
I love that. You were bored, so you signed up to get a very expensive degree.
Why not?
Why not? You're doing it. You're writing songs and you're speaking theology in ways that people can hear. I find it interesting. I came into my vocation as a pastor from art, my art degree, and so there's this creative nature about the way the spirit moves, I think, that is just so beautiful.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. Art, music. I often say at my shows when I'm talking about what I believe now, because I don't say that I identify as Christian in most spaces anymore, just because my belief system and my practice doesn't match that of a lot of people who identify as Christian, and so it's more clear if I say I don't. Um, but I say at my shows what I believe in fundamentally, like my most core belief is that art can change the world just by making us feel something. And theology is art. I think so. I really think so. Creative theology, something that is looking for a way to ignite something within us, to ignite spirit within us, to call us by our name, right? Art that does that, that's theology. And that theology is art. But I say all the time at my shows, like, feeling something is the stuff of humanity, and apathy is the stuff of empire. That's the stuff of oppressive powers. But feeling something, that is the most human thing. And if art and theology can get us there, then that can change the world.
Amen. Wow, you are doing such amazing work. So that brings me to your beautiful song, Plowshare Prayer. Can you tell us a little bit about where that came from within you, how it came to be, and maybe what you hope people might feel as you perform that song in your concerts?
I wrote Plowshare Prayer when I was working for 3 churches at once during the pandemic, during the lockdown period of the pandemic. A couple were virtual. For one of them, I was a songwriter. Um, and I don't care what you think about church. 3 churches is too many. The work wasn't life-giving to me anymore, and I was having panic attacks trying to do the work. One of the churches that I worked for at the time asked me to write a song for one of their prayer services, and prayer was not a part of my practice at the time. So I thought, how am I going to do this? And I ended up writing essentially what I consider my resignation letter and my love letter for the church, all wrapped up in one. I left all my cards on the table. I said, I can't say half truths. I need to just say it all. And so I just said basically everything. I mean, it's kind of my creed, this song. And it came from the question, if I prayed, what would I want it to sound like? I want it to sound like all of this. And when I play it, when I perform it now, and people hear it, my biggest hope is that people see themselves in it. Because when I worked for churches and when I go to churches sometimes, the thing that breaks my heart the most is that there are people in the pews. Forget about the people outside the doors that you want to still come to your church. There are people in the pews who don't feel like they can bring all of themselves into the sanctuary, into their worship, into their faith, into their community. And so when I sing that song, I just want the parts of us that feel the most left out and the least seen. I just want us to feel seen and involved and welcomed and loved. So that's the goal with that song.
Our congregation has had a lot of conversation about, we know what God's doing in our church, but what's going on outside the walls of the church? And we're seeing God still work out there. And you're a case in point. So I'm just curious as to what maybe do you hope the future of church, of God's work, of how that looks?
The most beautiful future of the church that I can hope and dream for is that it is non-anxious. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in church members and church leaders when change happens, when people such as myself find life-giving iterations of God outside the walls of a Christian practice. There's a lot of anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the truth is, I know the truth is that the image of God and love, which is God and God is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is everywhere. It is so not limited by whatever practices we've determined are the most sacred and the most holy. Not to say that those practices aren't sacred and aren't holy and aren't important and aren't meaningful. I am a ritual liturgy geek nerd, biggest advocate over here. However, love and life and joy and peace and hope are everywhere. And when people find that in the world, I think it deserves to be celebrated. We don't need to have anxiety about that. So I think that my biggest hope for the church is that we would be able to look into the world where there are fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, where we see those things in the world and we can say, wow, God is big. That's church. That's faith. Where people are embracing those things, that's faith. Doesn't look like mine, but that's faith.
Would you mind just speaking directly to the congregation? What would you want us to hear from you?
Yeah. Hello, congregation. I think I just want you to hear that every single part of yourself, assuming that you are all part of this Christian Methodist tradition and that this language will resonate with you. I want you to know that every single part of yourself, even the part that you don't like to love, is part of the image of God, that God is all of that, and that you're made of the good stuff. That's all I want you to know.
I will always believe you, I pray that you're heard, and I pray that this